Welcome back to the channel. Today we will travel through the pages of What If Issei Was Born with 4 Powers Part 1. The link to the story will be in the description below. Now let's start. Prologue. One stormy night, a certain couple spent several hours inside a shrine they both had never seen or heard of. Oruhaidu gazed calmly at the storm that flooded the entirety of Kuo town, a little away from the shrine's entrance exit. In his embrace, enjoying the slight warmth he emitted, was his wife, Akane Haidu. Akane, Goru could easily tell, really worried and anxious. The reason for that was that they had tried to have a child 2 times the last 2 years. And failed both times because of complications during Akane's pregnancy. Goru shared his wife's feelings on the matter. That is, before he entered the shrine they temporarily used as a shelter from the storm. After all, this was the day they had been informed from their doctor that Akane was pregnant. For the 3rd time. A strange, yet very welcome calmness overcame his being as soon as he entered the unknown shrine. The building had no signs as to which god it belonged to. Except from a Christian church on the other side of Kuo, there were some Shinto shrines, dedicated to, mostly, Amaterasu, the Shinto goddess of the sun. This small building, that was at the farthest end of Kuo, on a small hill overlooking the town, however, did not seem to belong to anyone. Aside from a simple 2x2 mat, it had nothing else. Or, so the 2 future parents thought. They were too busy to get out of the storm to take the time to examine the, admittedly, small room. Unseen from both, right behind them at the wall, there was a small 2-handed, sheathed sword, seemingly hanging from the ceiling. Its handle was white, with 4 black diamonds, real diamonds on each side of the handle. A simple red ribbon, long enough to reach the ceiling, was tied all around the handle, showing only the diamonds. The seemingly plain blade was one-sided, curving a little inward at the end. Where the blade and handle united, there was a thin, dull gold pronge. As for the sheath, it was the same plain red color as the ribbon. All in all, it was just a plain sword to the normal eyes. Inside the extended ribbon, there were 2 glassy orbs, each one the size of a golf ball, hidden perfectly from every species' prying eyes. They were, carefully, tied, one after the other, where the handle ended. One orb had 2 ethereal colors circling inside it. Black and orange. Each in equal amounts. The other one, however, had a variety of colors, not unlike a rainbow. Orange red, yellow coated on orange red, purple black coated on orange red, bright crimson, and finally, pure and shiny gold. Out of all 3 objects, the second orb was the most beautiful. And, unbeknownst to everyone in this universe, the most powerful one. Well, almost everyone. There was a sentient entity inside the sword who knew about this fact. That said, it respected the pure unadulterated power coming from that orb. Not that the other orb's powers, or the sword's itself, for that matter, were insignificant. On the contrary, if used wisely, both powers were forces to be reckoned with, both individually and united. However, the beautiful orb's powers were on a whole other level. Especially if they were combined with the other 2. Anyway, you get the point how broken the guy girl, who gained those powers, would be. That said, those powers could only be used by a human. And not any ordinary human. The human had to have an affinity for the supernatural. So, the sword, the only object with a sentient being inside it, and the only one capable of sensing anything with a supernatural affinity, would choose, carefully, the human. The 3 powers would reside in. After all, they waited there, inside the small room, for centuries. Hoping that, sometime, there would come a human with a good heart to wield them. Well, that was what that gigantic red dragon had told the sword inside that void between all worlds and universes, with all and no colors, before bringing all 3 of them to the same room they were hanging from. With the sole excuse that this world needed protection. Nobody had even come close to this place. So, the entity inside the sword was, understandably, surprised that 2 humans came inside the small place on a rainy day. Tragically ironic, considering that the entity itself, as well as its previous wielder, hated the rain. The pleasantry, however, was that this couple of humans were pure-hearted ones. And, additionally, the woman was pregnant. What both humans couldn't and would never have known was that their unborn child had supernatural affinity from what the entity inside the sword could sense. The boy. Good. The entity didn't want to have to do with a super-powerful girl and deal with her mood swings. Girls were difficult to deal with. Boys, on the other hand, were easy. Almost too easy. And seeing that these soon-to-be parents of one unborn boy were good people, the entity decided to become the reason why their son would become the most powerful human in this world. This human would become this world's #1 protector. Like the entity's previous wielder, whose name it could never forget. Just like he knew of the two orbs' origins and what powers they withheld. As well as which power each color represented. So, when the storm died down and the two humans got out of the small place, probably going back to their home, the entity untied the ribbon from the ceiling. It manifested itself in human form and followed the two humans, not caring how much noise it made. It couldn't be seen from regular humans. The grin it sported was full of glee, even if it came out as bloodthirsty. As it was walking, the entity untied the two orbs and got a look at them. They shined brightly, their colors doing a, seemingly, happy dance inside the small confinement of the glass. Its grin widened in satisfaction that the orbs seemed to be as excited as itself was. The entity released its hold on the orbs and watched in untamed satisfaction how they shot themselves inside the woman's belly without hurting her and getting inside the unborn boy. Then, the manifested entity shot itself as well in the same place the orbs now inhabited, leaving the plain-looking sword hovering behind the parents and following them. Without being able to be seen by regular eyes. When the two humans reached their simple two-story house, the entity sent the sword to the only vacant room for when the child would be born. In the meantime, it had to make preparations for the future protector of the world. It had to seal the dangerous powers inside the orbs in order to activate them when the boy would reach his mid-teens, an age when the boy would be able to comprehend the burden that would befall on his shoulders, as well as capable of wielding said powers. Not to mention the boy's own power, which managed to surprise, pleasantly at that, the entity. Leaving aside the physical enhancements the powers would give the boy as soon as it was born, as well as the boy's own power, the entity sealed the rest for the aforementioned time. It only had one hope. That the boy wouldn't turn out to be, or become, a prude, just like its previous wielder was. Chapter 1. Issei Haidu. That was the name Akane and Goru Haidu decided for their only son. Pure and honest, like his namesake. And, from what the doctors had told them after the boy's birth, it was an unexplained miracle that Akane had been pregnant for the third time in the first place. Not to mention that her pregnancy had no complications whatsoever. So, for the Haidu parents, with no close relatives to speak of, their little Issei was their miracle. Their shine and joy. They never, even once, commented on some of his abnormalities as Issei grew up. The boy was strong. His hearing, sense of smell and eyesight were out of this world. His dark green eyes turned to reptilian slits when agitated. His teeth were able to bite off oak wood like it was paper, with his longer than normal canines being his strongest teeth. Also, he was almost unnaturally warm to the point he didn't even need winter clothes. Lastly, the boy seemed like he teleported when he ran around. And, since the doctors had said that he was miracle, the two parents took it literally and were ecstatic for their son's abilities. They were, especially, proud that he remained humble as he grew up. As amazing as his abilities were, there were some downsides for the young boy. Issei had only one friend. It was only because of his sense of smell that he could tell that Rin was, actually, a girl named Irina Shidu. The boy was devastated when Rin had to move and go to England with her parents at the early age of 7 years old. The boy had done nothing but mope and sadness in his room for 3 days. He, only, got out of it to go to the toilet. Not even for food or water. He had a serious crush on Rin, and he didn't even know it. The parents were devastated themselves for not being able to help their son in his time of need. Not only that, but it seemed that Issei didn't even want their help in the first place. After the 3 days had passed, Issei had decided to go to the park he and Rin used to play at. It was close to their house and, so, his parents let him go. They trusted him enough to return, at the very least, on time for dinner. He was a good boy, with a heart of gold, and would never try to, actively, make them upset with him. That day, without the parents knowing, at one side of that park, there was an old man spouting stories of how glorious the eye of women were. Issei, being the curious boy he was, just listened, absently, from the swing he was sitting on. He didn't want to be with the other kid sitting in front of the old man and listening closely with unrestrained excitement. Even if he was there with the other children, the boy knew that things would be awkward, considering the others all but shunned him due to his abnormalities. They had openly admitted that they were afraid of him. So, there was no reason to make them even more fearful of him. In the end, even those stories couldn't fill the void that Rin had left behind. That wasn't to say, however, that Issei wasn't, at the very least, curious. He was a great deal curious. Not only for those op-eye the old man had been spouting off the whole afternoon, but the whole female body. In layman's terms, the opposite sex. That night, the Haidu parents couldn't even begin to describe their joy upon seeing their son's spirits not on the dumps. He seemed curious about something, but not enough to make him completely forget Rin's departure. The Kane could never have expected the conversation the family had as soon as they finished eating their dinner, Issei included, after 3 days and nights of absence. Goru, on the other hand, was positively ecstatic. His baby boy was growing up. For a Kane, it was weird to see her husband have the talk with their son when the latter was only 7 years old. Even weirder was that, no matter how many bumps she had created on his head with her wooden spoon, her husband kept on with the conversation like nothing had happened. It seemed Goru's pride and joy were affecting his sense of pain. Even worse, her son listened to his father with rapt attention. And, worst of all, her husband told their son of his unfulfilled dream of having a harem. Her only solace was that her son didn't seem very eager to fulfill Goru's dream for the both of them. That said, Issei's wistful face and matching tone when he had uttered that he wanted to be loved had almost crashed her hopes. Almost. Even if he had looked simply adorable at that moment. Because, even if she didn't share her husband's beliefs on the matter, a Kane wanted many grandchildren to spoil. So, in the end, Issei would have to have many women by his side in order for her dream to come to fruition. Unbeknownst to all three humans, the entity inside the boy was extremely satisfied with everything it had seen so far through its future wielder's eyes. Except from the 3 days the boy had stayed in his room, those were a living hell, or rather, a living storm. Just like the one when it had first seen these humans, only thrice the duration. All in all, it seemed it had chosen well. Especially since, after that night, its wielder decided to become even better of a person. Proper table manners. Studying for school with extreme diligency. Helping a Kane in housework for whatever and whenever she needed, even outside of their house. Working out. Learning to fight properly through action movies and YouTube videos. Learning swordsmanship through the school's kendo club and the neighboring dojo. Even learning all kinds of dances. As well as studying strategies through online chess and other online books and videos. All that in order to become the perfect boyfriend material. As well as a very acceptable and versatile member in society. Then, when Issei reached 12 years old, Goru allowed him access to porn sites in order to see how babies were made. To its utter amusement, the entity inside Issei discovered its wielder's fetishes. Despite him not showing it, the boy was a pure sadist with a romantic side and a love for both. Boobs no matter the size and butts. Girls in stockings, high heels and every other sexy undergagement. Last, but not least, role play and cosplay, with Issei's personal favorite being the strict business women that break down and become mindless and masochistic sluts. Issei was no homosexual, but he held no ill will towards them either. The same went for gender-bended people, as well as traps. Anyway. At the age of 14, Issei had already become a master in kendo, but with no physical indication he was one, like a gold medal in a tournament. He had gotten the recommendation that he could be a shishu, though, if he ever wanted. His overall fighting skills were through the roof, and his physical strength was on a whole other level than from when he was just a small child. A well-mannered boy, wearing his golden heart on his sleeve. His physique was that of an averagely tall teen, with a lean and muscular figure, yet not overly so. His hair were short, milk chocolate in color and spiky enough to point in every possible direction. His facial features were sharp, like his dark green eyes. All in all, his looks gave him the bad boy, yet enticing vibe that girls his age and a little older seemed to love. His lightly tanned, flawless skin completed his roguish looks. Though, due to his reputation from his childhood, he was still alone and without any friends. Even the girls didn't dare to approach him, only admiring him from a distance. His parents were proud of him, especially since he had become the top student in school, which was all that mattered to him. The same with the entity inside of him, even if he didn't know about it yet. All in all, Issei had been growing up like a proper young man, albeit with several more abilities. The entity decided to make itself known to its wielder, as well as about all said wielder's other powers, including the one he was born with. Issei was strong and sturdy enough to withhold all these powers without his human body being destroyed from the inside. After all, the entity had ensured that the sword was always close to Issei, no matter where the brunette was. It was the night of Issei's graduation from junior high school. In other words, the last day of school, right before spring break. After which the spring break, Issei would enter high school as a freshman or a first-year student in one of the most prestigious schools of the whole country. Kuo Academy. An all-girls school, turning co-ed on the new school year. As a matter of fact, the Haidu boy would be the one with the top scores ever entering the school. As for the other boys entering with him, they were the only ones that passed the entrance exams. aside from many diligent girls, of course. Thankfully, the Japanese school system didn't require the top freshman to give a speech on the first day of the school year. Just be there early and leave when the day ends. As well as get acquainted with the other students and teachers, or the whole school in general. Bekane was so proud of her son that they had all of Issei's favorite foods for dinner that night. Goru had tried and failed to tease his son, as well as probe him to start his harem in high school. After they had dinner, of course. No fun was worthy of his wife's famous wooden spoon attacks on his head. The Haidu matriarch, however, all but demanded of her son to find a girlfriend and get married quickly in order to have her grandbabies to spoil as soon as possible. Issei, for his part, could only sweat drop at his parents' antics. After that, the brunette had a shower and then went to sleep. He wasn't tired, but the excitement of the day, as well as his overall performance during the exams, had taken its toll on him. So, he decided to rest early. What he didn't expect, though, especially upon entering his room, was to find a seed sword on his bed. Issei narrowed his eyes in suspicion as he lightly closed and locked the door behind him with practiced ease. He would have known if his father had bought it. Goru couldn't hold his excitement for anything, even if a cane spooned him on the head. Case in point, the talk when he was only 7. And any other time Goru was truly excited. So, no. His father wasn't the one to buy it. Bekane only got out of the house for grocery shopping with Goru's money, so it wasn't her either. So, the question remained. How did that sword get on his bed if nobody from the family, including himself, never even bought one? His suspicion grew to its highest point when he had reached the bed and loomed over the sword. That said, Issei felt a great sense of familiarity with the sword, which made no sense to him whatsoever. Why was he feeling so familiar to a sword of all things, especially one he had never even seen? He, subconsciously, used his right hand to reach towards the sword on his bed. As soon as he touched it, he was hit with a tidal wave of information. Of course, he couldn't have known that. So, he was left breathless, with his eyes wide in complete disbelief at what was getting inside his mind. Powers. And lots of them. Even the knowledge to control them and use them in a fight, or even in his daily life. Not to mention the fighting techniques themselves. He was so much in shock from it all that he couldn't even move. That said, as soon as the flood of information had finished to be so ruthlessly dumped in his mind, did Issei manage to draw a breath. Even then, all that did was to make him aware of his surroundings and how dizzy he was from the ordeal. Now, truly tired, the brunette sloppily collapsed on his bed, thankfully in his boxers, with his right hand gripping the sheathed sword like his life depended on it. His last thought before sleep overcame him was that whatever had happened was surreal, like almost a dream. In layman's terms, Issei fainted on his bed. Issei's eyes flattered open, and he was almost blinded by the sun's bright light. He managed to notice, however, that the sunlight came from behind him and not directly above him. With some more effort, and his left arm shielding the upper half of his face, Issei opened his eyes fully and stood up in order to take in his surroundings. Doing a slow spin on his place, the brunette took a look around and was surprised at what he saw. He was on a sandy shore, still on his boxers that he wore after he got out of shower. Calm, crystal blue sea water, with the sand and small rocks that he could clearly see as if he was upon them, were gently rocked back and forth from the small waves the sea was making. The shore he was on seemed to be a clearing from a thick and dark forest. An extremely tall, unnaturally so, oak tree was easily seen from the shore. It was the only distinguishable tree, and it was, seemingly, in the middle of the forest. Issei didn't want to enter the forest due to him liking the weather on the shore. Not to mention that it was creepy as hell. As strong as he was, he didn't feel confident enough to come across whatever was in the forest. His ears and nose twitched as he breathed in. Aside from the scent of trees, sand and sea, Issei caught one more scent that made him freeze in shock as he faced the entrance exit of the forest. Despite how slow and purposeful the footsteps he heard were, his heartbeat rose to 150 the moment he caught the scent. His heartbeat rose even more as soon as the person he had caught the scent of came out in the clearing, with their hands behind their back and stopping as soon as they locked gazes. The figure gave a roguishly bloodthirsty smirk as they greeted him. "Yo, pretty boy." Issei couldn't believe his eyes, which had widened to the size of dinner plates in utter disbelief. After all, nobody had claimed to have seen themselves right in front of them. In clear view. Not in the mirror. Issei just knew that, aside from all kinds of weird, this meeting was anything but normal. Chapter 3. Issei opened his eyes and, immediately, noticed that he was on the same shore as the last time he fell asleep. After a very quiet dinner, the brunette had a shower before he went to sleep. And now, here he was, gazing the calm, crystal clear water waving, softly, back and forth in front of his sand-covered feet. He didn't need any of his senses to tell him that Zangetsu was right behind him. And, he could already tell that the latter was smirking at him. The brunettes face turned serious and, without even turning to face Zangetsu, he asked the same question he had as soon as he entered the room. Albeit in a different way. How am I affiliated to the supernatural, Zangetsu? His voice was calm and curious as he spoke. As far as I know, you and the other two orbs' powers are the only ones. Inside me. Zangetsu, for his part, didn't lose his smirk at his wielder's calm demand. Honestly, King, the night I saw your parents for the first time, I knew there was a power inside you. He said honestly in a calm fashion. Issei turned his body to face Zangetsu, confusion all over his face. What power? Zangetsu shrugged helplessly. Not a fucking clue. Seeing his wielder getting frustrated, he decided to throw a bone. I only know that it resides in your soul and is sentient. Like me. Unlike me, however, this power is in the very depth of your soul. If, by any chance, is extracted from you, you'll die in the most excruciating way possible. He said. Seriously? Issei cringed at that. He didn't want to die. He couldn't die. After all, he had to protect the world, like Ichigo Kurosaki and Zangetsu himself did in their own world. Like them. Issei wanted to protect what he held dear first, then everything and everybody else. Anything else that might help me? The brunette asked in a hopeful tone, barely keeping himself from sounding sarcastic. Zangetsu looked thoughtful for a moment before locking gazes with his wielder. The only other thing I know is that it can be activated from your left arm. Nothing else. He said seriously, his malicious-looking eyes conveying his honesty on the matter. At the very least, it's something, rather than absolutely nothing. Issei sighed lightly in relief at the small bit of information his companion could give him. Even the negative one was useful to know, morbid as it was. Do you recommend a way to activate it? He requested conversationally. Beats me. The albino shrugged helplessly, again. You could always go to a remote place and try anything ridiculous. Once activated, there's no way the sentient being won't try to communicate with you. He suggested airily, not even himself knowing what to do about the situation regarding his wielder's own power. Issei looked conflicted on what he should do. He didn't want to look ridiculous as he tried to activate this power, whatever it was. However, he couldn't think of anything useful. Himself, no matter how smart he was. The latter fact made him frustrated. He was supposed to be the one to think possible winning scenarios when faced with a dead end. Not a fragment of his soul. Especially since that fragment came from another world altogether, despite these two worlds being similar. Not voicing his thoughts, Issei spoke about his next course of action in a serious manner. I'll use the hill where you came from and my mother showed me today as a testing ground. Then, I'll keep using it as my training ground, workout, swordsmanship and anything else that doesn't destroy my surroundings. Zangetsu nodded in agreement to the plan. Your destructive abilities can be trained in here. He said as an afterthought. That's useful. Issei blinked in pleasant surprise at the information. And for weightlifting, I can convince my parents to let me go to a gym, or something. He started to smile in satisfaction at the solid plan he and his albino self were fixing in a matter of few moments. Yeah. Zangetsu said simply with a small nod, before his demeanor changed to a serious one, again. You need to be careful, though, King. If this world is so similar to mine, then the supernatural beings will, most definitely, find you in some way or other. Even if you're strong enough to level countries, you need to prepare yourself for those creatures that'll come to your doorstep. Issei's good mood turned somber at that, acknowledging Zangetsu's point. Despite all his power, he wasn't ready to confront the supernatural world yet. So, how do I hide? Until I'm ready, then? He asked curiously with a frown on his face. Zangetsu narrowed his eyes, looking more menacing than he already was. You activate the power on your left hand first. After that, you learn about this world from the sentient being. Then, me and the other one will think of a way to hide your power from supernatural eyes and senses. By the time you go to school again, this must have been done. He all but announced in a very serious voice, complete with his arms crossed against his chest. Issei nodded in agreement to the last piece of the plan, relayed by both of them, mostly Zangetsu, since the latter had way more experience than Issei himself. Even if the brunette shared the albino's memories from the small amount of time spent on that hill, he didn't have the experience Zangetsu and Ichigo Kurosaki had in weird situations. Neither said a word as Issei started to vanish from the shore. They just nodded to each other, as if making a promise to reunite in a few hours to put their plan in motion. The brunette woke up, this time, in his room, his eyes staring the ceiling. Absently, he thought of putting some kind of wallpaper on there. Plain white was just boring and would drive him crazy, one day. Decision taken, he put on a pair of plain blue tracksuit pants and a matching t-shirt, wanting to go on that hill, right after he had his breakfast with his mother. Before that, however, he checked his wallet in order to see how much money he had saved from his allowances all these years. To his surprise, he had more than 200,000 yen. 227.360 yen was the exact amount he owned. The gym, that was the closest to his home, had a yearly register of 25.000 yen. It was right beside the kendo dojo he used to attend. Also, it was cheap. He could pay for 3 years in advance and the dent on his allowance wouldn't even be that noticeable. His parents were kind enough to not interfere what he did in his personal life so far, which included what he did with his money as well. All he had to do was to convince them to let him join the gym. Mind made up for what he would do at dinner when his father would be back home, Issei got out of his room and descended the stairs in his usual soundless manner. "Morning, Ka-chan." He greeted as he took his usual seat on the table. "Good morning, Ice." His mother greeted him normally, using none of her usual happiness, which, immediately, rose several red flags in his mind. "What's wrong?" he asked worriedly as his mother came to view and started to set up the table. Looking at her face, Issei knew that something was very wrong because she was actively hiding her facial expression. Nothing. Akane sighed lightly as she took a seat herself. She didn't want to tell her son that his father wouldn't be coming home until late at night. Issei narrowed his eyes as he saw his mother's demeanor take a turn for worse. "What happened, Ka-chan?" he, basically, demanded in a cold tone. Akane grimaced at her son's tone but didn't comment on it as she avoided eye contact. "Breakfast first, honey. Conversation later," she said in a motherly tone, trying to calm her son down, yet still avoiding to look at him in the eyes. After a short pause, Issei relented. "Fine," he said calmly, not hiding his scowl of displeasure. He noticed that his mother had yet to even look at him, and that made him more edgy than he already was. Without another word, aside from Itadakimasu, the duo had their breakfast in total silence. Only the sound of chewing that came from Akane's side and the chopsticks from both were heard inside the whole house. As usual, Issei was the one to clean up the table, wash and dry the dishes. Akane watched him as his back was facing her with a sad expression. Her eyes were red and puffy, indicating that she had cried recently. Something that she didn't want to reveal to her son. Neither about her insecurities that her husband was away from home because he had an affair, nor that she had hidden those insecurities from her husband as well. Since her mind was elsewhere, Akane didn't notice that her son had returned to the table and watched her, with barely restrained fury, shedding more tears on the table. "You're crying, Ka-chan," Issei said evenly, announcing his presence to his absent-minded mother. Akane stiffened at his voice, but the tears kept coming out slowly as she faced her stoic son, who had leaned back on his chair with his arms crossed. "I want to know why," Issei demanded icily. Whoever made his mother cry would pay dearly. Aside from his father, of course. Unless the guy had done something unforgivable. The Haidu matriarch sniffed and used the back of her delicate left arm to wipe her tears before blowing her nose on a paper towel. The sound would have been amusingly funny if somebody didn't take her feelings into consideration. Issei wasn't one. His facial expression remained stoical, despite the fury inside him coming close to a boiling point. It took a few more minutes for Akane to find the resolve to tell her son all of her thoughts. "Today, Goru-kun won't come home until late at night. I know that your father is doing his best for us, but I can't help it, you know. I'm a woman, I can't help but think that all of this overworking hours are spent to another woman." As she poured her heart out to her son in a cracked voice, she never noticed that her tears came anew. As for Issei, he didn't interrupt her and let her get her frustrations out of her system and remained stoical. He didn't want to believe that his father was a cheater, but that didn't mean he would rule it out. Nobody was perfect, including himself. That said, he didn't have the signs. If there was another woman, he would have smelt her on his father. There had been various faint scents on his father due to the latter's job, both male and female, but none of those scents lingered more on Goru than what he was used to all these years. So, from this point of view, Goru was as innocent as they come. Not to mention the fact that at Goru's crotch there was only his mother's scent. Disturbing as his ability was on this matter, Issei was very thankful for it in this instance. Breathing a light sigh of relief that there wasn't something serious going on, Issei relaxed on his seat, with his mother becoming perplexed at his behavior. The brunette allowed a small, reassuring smile to come to his lips as he reached his mother's hands and clasped them in his own in a comforting fashion. "Ah-chan, Tu-san isn't unfaithful to you and our family," he started in a softly. At her cute, questioning, almost pleading look she gave him, he elaborated. "Tu-san has really only been working. There hasn't been another cent, aside from yours, on his lips," and he paused, his expression turning sheepish, and he had the decency to blush. As he finished in a meaningful tone. Down there, his head gesturing to his crotch. An awkward silence ensued, with Akane's mind catching up with what her son had told her. Relief and amusement were the only two feelings she held onto from the various ones she felt upon realizing what her son implied. "Of course, if Goru-kun had been cheating on me, my adorable Ice would have known right away and would have, probably, confronted his father first, before doing something about it." She had her relieved thought behind a matching smile as she basked in her son's comfort. She didn't even feel the need to tease her son at that moment. And, was it just her, or did her son start emitting more warmth than usual? Food for thought at a later time. Seeing his mother's expression, gradually, getting back on what he was used to seeing, Issei relaxed even more. He wouldn't have the talk about him joining a gym tonight, but he was relieved that his words cheered his mother up. That said, he would be on alert for something like what they discussed happening. He was willing to contribute on his parents' relationship once his father would get the promotion and the working hours would return to normal. The idea of making a surprise to his parents was what made Issei go back to his room without exchanging another word with his mother. Akane, for her part, cheerily made preparations for lunch and dinner, wanting to start on her son's scarf as soon as possible. Especially since he managed to make her so happy 2 days in a row. Once entering his room, Issei noticed that he had forgotten to put on a pair of socks. Lightly facepalming at his own stupidity, while also ignoring a certain someone's amused laughter in his head, the brunette put on his socks before turning his laptop on. He did a search on relatively cheap open tickets for outside of Japan, and the stay to cost, at most, 100.000 yen for a week in a 4 to 5-star hotel. He grimaced as he didn't find anything satisfactory to him or for his parents to enjoy. Everything was too expensive for his current allowance to afford. With a heavy sigh of disappointment, he turned his laptop off and stood up from his desk. His eyes landed on what was laying beside his bed. It was Zangetsu's sealed sword. And, since he wanted to take it with him, he needed to be careful about it. He didn't know if there were any other supernatural humans, like himself, or other species out there. Thankfully, the sword was short enough to get inside his school bag, even if diagonically. On second thought, he needed his bag anyway, in order to carry a couple of water bottles to hydrate himself. Carrying his bag on both shoulders, Issei got out of his room, closed the door behind him and descended the stairs, soundlessly as always, before he went to the fridge and took out 2 water bottles and, with practiced ease, he put them in his bag. Then, he went to the living room, where he saw his mother on the couch, holding a couple of long needles. On the coffee table, there was a variety of strings. The thought that his mother had already started knitting his scarf made his heart melt in happiness. This scarf would, indeed, be special, since his mother was making it from scratch, putting all of her love and dedication into it. "Ah-chan, I'm going out for a run and to work out," he told her softly from behind her, before exerting above her to plant a kiss on her forehead. He missed her radiant smile at his small gesture, before she called out, "Okay. Be back before lunch, dear." Happily, now that her mood was back to normal. The jog to the hill did nothing to tire the brunette out. He wasn't even the least winded. Also, he had only 3 hours before lunch, which had him being in a hurry. He, hastily, placed his school bag inside the small building before he went a little away. He didn't what his other power was and he didn't want to, accidentally, destroy the place. So, he faced where there was nothing but greenery on sight. He lifted his left hand to his eye level and stared at his slightly open palm. "So, how should I go about this?" he asked seriously to no one. Well, except from Zangetsu, who manifested himself a little away to Issei's right. He had a thoughtful look on his face, and his arms were crossed against his chest. Probably, doing a ridiculous pose and shouting a catchy phrase would be enough for it to manifest. He suggested with a straight face. However, upon receiving a deadpan stare from his wielder, he, too, realized that he was even more ridiculous than his own suggestion. "Alright, I get it," he relented with a sigh, before thinking another way on the spot. "Why don't you imagine something strong, like a dragon, or something?" Then, concentrate on that image and pour some of your power onto your left arm. Issei sighed dejectedly at that as well. However, it wasn't as ridiculous as Zangetsu's first suggestion. In fact, it sounded like a possible way to unlock this power of his in a normal fashion. With his resolve motivated enough for now, Issei closed his eyes. Drawing from Zangetsu's memories, he remembered that gigantic red dragon with 4 wings and golden eyes. The being was as beautiful as it was ferocious and powerful. Even if it was only a memory, despite it not being his own, he could tell that the dragon was many more times as powerful as Issei himself was. With his eyes closed, he didn't know what was happening on his own body. Zangetsu watched in intrigued glee, like a child watching its favorite show, as Issei emitted a grass-green aura all around his body. Well, aside from his left arm, from shoulder to nails. The aura there was very potent and took a darker shade of green. Nothing bad so far, which was something that Issei, even with his eyes closed, could tell. Then, he drew some power from one of his other ones, aside from Zangetsu. He felt a little heavy, but continued to do so for a couple of moments more. Once he felt that it was enough, he stopped the flow of energy on his left arm. However, his mind, unnecessarily, drifted off. All this power inside him, including this one he was about to activate, was for a purpose. Zangetsu's eyes widened a little as the aura around his wielder took the same shade as the latter's left arm, meaning that it became more potent. Issei's purpose, since he had been in his mother's womb, was to protect the world. Which was why he had received Zangetsu's power, as well as the other two. That said, the whole world came after he made sure his parents were safe. A secondary image appeared beside the growling dragon inside Issei's mind. His mother's face. And she was crying, like this morning, over her husband's corpse. Issei gritted his teeth in absolute fury at that image. Zangetsu, not knowing what was happening in his wielder's mind, since he wasn't inside it to read his thoughts, was further surprised at what was happening to the aura around Issei. The dark green was tinged with a crimson-red color. There was something else, though, which made the albino to wear a bloodthirsty smirk on his lips. Issei was emitting power. And a lot of it. Also, it surpassed Zangetsu's power by a large margin. Issei, still with his eyes closed, growled like a rabid beast. He would never let that second image come to reality. Whoever, or whatever, touched even a hair of his parents, there would be hell to pay. And, with that thought, he released the tight hold he had on whatever he was doing. Unbeknownst to both of them, a certain dragon inside Issei woke up from his deep slumber. Immediately, he noticed the power his way younger than he expected host wielded. What made him smirk in both bloodthirst and satisfaction, however, was that his host was, still, a human. His rival's host wouldn't even know what hit them. After all, he was just awakened and he could already tell that this host was exceptionally powerful. He would gladly give his power to this host in order to win one over his rival. Zangetsu was forced to narrow his eyes from the bright crimson light that enveloped his wielder. There was a loud, booming voice from inside the brilliant light, announcing something. Boosted gear. In the underworld, where a certain organization resided, a certain individual woke up from their nap in one of the many rooms the gigantic building had. They felt the released power from the human world and couldn't stop the battle-hungry smirk that came on their face. However, even if the power was potent, it was, still, just an awakening. They would have to wait for the right moment. Patiently. Grow strong, my rival. Our fight shall be glorious. Chapter 4. You know, this isn't as weird as I thought it would be. Totally agreed, King. Issei and Zangetsu were calmer now that the brilliant crimson light had faded away. Their tones, however, matched the blankness they felt upon the revelation of the brunette's left arm. Or, more specifically, what had engulfed his arm from the elbow down. Both were inspecting, with curious gazes, what appeared to be a gauntlet. It was as simple as it was magnificent. It had the same color as the brilliant crimson light from just a few moments ago. It had a big dark green jewel on top where the back of his palm was. Also, it had 2 golden, jagged, lightning-shaped thingies coming out from where the gauntlet ended. His fingers weren't accepted from being covered, and now, they looked like dragon claws. Lastly, the gauntlet seemed to be made from some kind of metal alloy, and both Issei and Zangetsu could tell that it was indestructible. 5 minutes had passed since the whole ordeal had even started. It's way too flashy for my tastes. Issei almost complained as he continued to inspect it, clenching and unclenching his fingers to get a feel of it. Surprisingly, it didn't differentiate from the original feeling of his hand and arm. It was just like he had a second layer of skin, albeit even tougher than his own. Zangetsu just nodded in agreement. his mind was elsewhere, though. For just a moment, his wielder had released a massive amount of power. Without himself noticing, a deep frown appeared on his face. "What's on your mind, Zangetsu?" Issei asked him curiously, noticing the albino's expression. Zangetsu breathed a light sigh before explaining himself thoroughly. "King, you didn't realize it, but even for just a moment, you released a great deal amount of power. There's no way that someone didn't feel it. If there are any supernatural beings in this town, they'll come and see what happened here. You were like a beacon with enough power to wipe the entirety of Japan in the span of a second. Right now, even with your power, you're not ready to confront anything in this world. My experience won't help you either, since I have no fucking clue what we'll be dealing with in the future." Issei's mind ran a mile a minute at his companion's explanation. He had to hide himself until he was ready to become involved with the supernatural of this world. And if what Zangetsu said about the power output he released was true, then he needed to hide fast. First things first, though. How do I make this gauntlet go away? Just as he thought that, while staring at said gauntlet, the object of his thought vanished in dull crimson particles, revealing his own unharmed arm. Just thinking about dismissing it, it disappears. Useful to know. Issei muttered in satisfaction with his find. Zangetsu nodded in approval of his wielder's action before he spoke with certainty. "You have 3 hours until lunchtime. The maximum you can use, however, is 2. Even if your power was felt all around the world, the supernatural beings will come by the time you have lunch. So, do whatever training you have to do efficiently, without testing anything, and, certainly, don't use any of your power. Keep it physical." "I get it." Issei nodded in understanding before doing what the albino suggested right away. Said albino faded away, going back to Issei's mind to, silently, observe his wielder's skills in hand-to-hand combat. By doing that, he would copy them right away, so he could use them against a brunette to make him more efficient. And to have more fun, of course. Issei started with light stretching to get his body ready before he got himself immersed in shadow fighting. He used whatever skills he had been training on himself as well as the hand-to-hand skills, the other 2 powers engraved in his mind. Sometime in the future, he knew that they would be more than useful. So, he put all of his concentration in training these skills. After an hour and a half passed, he drank a whole bottle of water for hydration, since his body was layered in sweat. Immediately afterwards, Issei took his sword out of his bag and got back to where he'd been training. He unsheathed the sword and, after thinking about it, he kept Zangetsu's true form sealed, not wanting to attract any more attention than what he'd already had. So, he trained all his skills in kendo in a little less than half an hour. He could train the sword's real form with the aforementioned albino, after all. After that, he drank the other bottle of water in a single go before he packed up and started to jog back to his home, leaving no trace of his presence there whatsoever. He made it back to his home with some time to spare. Without even greeting his mother, who managed to get a glimpse of her son as he, soundlessly, entered the house. Issei went straight to his room. There, he took a new pair of boxers and shorts to wear before he went to have a nice hot bath to cleanse the sweat off of his well-sculptured body. As both mother and son had their compassionately silent lunch, they were left oblivious to the bullet Issei had dodged. A bullet he wasn't ready to face yet. That didn't mean, however, his ears didn't work overtime. He wished his nose had the same efficiency as his ears. But beggars couldn't be choosers, in this case. Back on the hill Issei had departed from an hour or so ago, several people appeared through 2, what appeared to be, magic circles. 1 red and 1 blue, with both sporting intricate designs, looking like family emblems of some sort. From each circle appeared 2 girls, 4 in total. All 4 of them were, almost, inhumanly beautiful in their own right. The first girl was a young, bespectable woman in her mid to late teens, with a slim figure and dark blue eyes. Her chest was on the small side, but no so much as to be considered flat. Her black hair was styled in a bob cut. Her facial expression showed that she was both strict and intelligent. Her name was Citri Sona, but was known as Shatori Sauna in the human world. There was another young and bespectable woman, albeit a little taller than the rest, while also at the same age. Though, her glasses were blue, semi-rimmed and with square lenses. Her only other similarity she shared with Sona was that her hair was black. Hers, however, was so long that reached the back of her knees, with split bangs on her face. Her eyes were heterochromic, with the left one being violet and the right one light brown in color. Her bust was nothing to gloat about, but wasn't anything to laugh at either. Her name was Shinra Tsubaki. The last black-haired girl of the group of four was a truly beautiful young lady, the same age as the aforementioned two. Her hair was tied in a long ponytail, which reached all the way down to her legs, with two strands sticking out from the top and sloping backwards, with an orange ribbon keeping it in place. Her bust size was the largest of the group, but her violet eyes were what complemented her overall beauty and voluptuous figure. Her name was Himejima Keno. If the three young ladies up until now were beautiful, the last girl could be considered a true miracle of beauty. Flawless white skin, voluptuous figure and blue, seductively captivating eyes. Her long crimson hair, with a single strand sticking upwards, or in a hogue in Japanese terms, was the icing on a very delicate, very beautiful and very tasty cake. Her name was Gremory Rias. All four of them had two things in common. 1. They were all about to enter their second year in Kuo Academy, the same school our protagonist will attend to. 2. They were all devils, with Tsubaki and Akeno being the followers of Sona and Rias respectively. All four of them wore thoughtful expressions on their faces as they surveyed the hill for any signs of the power they had felt. They even took a look inside the small building, in case whoever had released that power was hiding there. To their growing unease and frustration, they found absolutely nothing that indicated somebody had been there in the first place. Whoever was responsible for the power we felt seems to have left a while ago, Sona said, stoically, as she used her right hand to adjust her glasses. The light reflected upon them, making her look a little menacing. The other three girls were unfazed. Secretly, Akeno basked at the others' frustration and wanted to tease them. She held back on her desire, however, because the situation was, unfortunately, serious. This is a problem, Rias muttered worriedly, lightly biting on her right thumb to express her nervousness. As overseers and protectors of Kuo, there would be serious consequences for all of us if a Longinus class sacred gear has awakened in our town. Especially if they turn out to be a rampaging person. Are we so sure that they hold a Longinus, but you? Akeno asked the crimson-haired devil in well-hidden disbelief, coming out as curiosity. Sona was the one to answer her. There's absolutely no way the amount of power we all felt to be from a regular sacred gear. Especially since it was only just awakened. She explained seriously, her eyebrows forming a frown in thought. What should we do, then, Kaichu? Tsubaki asked her, since Sona was the smartest of the four. No, the whole Kuo Academy. Not only Sona, but Rias as well was trying to think of something to do about the situation. After a long pause, Sona came to a decision. We'll do nothing, for now, Tsubaki, everyone. We have neither the resources, nor the amount of people necessary to search for this unknown person. Even if we have our familiars look out for us, there's the danger of what would befall them should the person we're looking for spots them. She explained her sound logic on the matter. Even if this whole situation frustrated Rias to end, she had to conquer that Sona's way of thinking was the best course of action. Sona's right. We won't do anything, for now. If this person shows up again, anywhere inside our territory, we'll hunt them down for questioning, since we were given the okay from the Mau themselves. She said seriously. Sona just nodded in agreement to the plan. They had gotten so long to appear on that hill due to the amount of paperwork the Mau had to fill before she and Rias had the okay to investigate and take whatever action they seemed fit to solve this mystery. Since we have a plan on how to deal with this person, we should get back to the rest of our peerages, Rias. Sona spoke stoically. Rias hummed in agreement, and with a flick of their fingers and a magic circle, later, they were gone without a trace. Issei opened his eyes as he sat cross-legged on his bed, Zangetsu's sealed sword placed on his lap. He had strained his ears to hear what would happen after he had left on that hill. To his utter disbelief, only 4 girls had appeared. Young ones as well, considering the used terms such as President Butchu and Student Council President Kaichu. His shock on the matter was that they were, apparently, supernatural beings. And, guessing on one of them saying the Mau themselves, they were some kind of demons in human form. Because no regular demon would speak human language so fluently. Last, but not least, they seemed to have other followers or subordinates of some kind, which meant more people like them. The term peerages suggested that, in his mind. The brunette narrowed his eyes in concentration. Zangetsu was right. He wasn't ready to face the supernatural, despite the power he withheld. He needed more information. And his only hope for that information resided in the gauntlet in his left arm that he knew better than make it appear in his home. So, unfortunately, he had to be patient. Hoping to meet this other entity in his sleep tonight. The only other useful thing he heard was what the power he awakened a little while ago was called. Longinus class sacred gear. and that it was, apparently, stronger than a regular sacred gear. Nothing else on that either, which was frustrating. He knew more about 3 otherworldly powers than whatever powers there were in his own world. Speaking of, he needed a way to tell which person, or even creature, was of the supernatural world. Since these girls detected his power and could tell that it was dangerous. There was a possibility they would be his future classmates. Which meant that he wanted to know who's who and what's what. That said, he needed a way to hide his power from any detectors ASAP. Again, both of these were to be discussed and, possibly, done by the entity inside that gauntlet. Issei sighed heavily and rubbed the bridge of his nose to alleviate an incoming migraine. All this supernatural business made him way too stressed. And it had only been a couple of days since this mess started, with Zangetsu deeming him ready to wield the 3 otherworldly powers. His stress was another thing that pointed out how ready he wasn't. At the very least, these girls seemed like they were going to leave that hill alone for the foreseeable future. Which meant that he could work out there undetected, for the time being. Also, Issei made sure to remember their names, Sona, Riaz and Tsubaki, whom announced themselves as overseers and protectors of Kuo. Though he didn't hear the 4th person's name, he could tell that her Japanese was as fluent as his own. Which meant this person had been a native. That was a good thing. It meant that they could become allies in the future, should their status remain. He would start with protecting his parents, then Kuo as a whole. And, slowly but surely, the world, as this was what he'd been burdened to do since before his birth. Mind made up, Issei closed his eyes, again, concentrating on the sword on his lap. When he reopened them, he was on the usual shore in his mindscape. He had a lot of stress to relieve, and Zangetsu was the only one available to perform that duty. Please, don't tell me you turned homosexual, King. Issei narrowed his eyes, dangerously, at the accusation as he turned to face the mockingly laughing albino. Punching bag. Acquired. Mission. Hit it with all you've got. And, just like that, Issei's stress relief session began. At night, the brunette felt refreshed. His bout with Zangetsu didn't have a winner, but his nerves had calmed down considerably. He had a pleasant dinner with his mother, who told him that his scarf was to be completed in a couple of days or so, before Kane went to sleep. Although, not without warning them to not take a peek at his scarf before it was finished. He had taken it upon himself to clean up the table and wait for his father, since he wouldn't have school the next day, in order to serve him some food, if Goro wanted to. Who was he kidding? His father had never eaten outside of the house, as long as the brunette could remember. Goro always had something homemade from his wife with him. And, since his parents knew that his father would be back late, he was sure his mother would have prepared more food than usual, so that his father wouldn't starve to death. Once his father was back home, Issei was relieved that his mother's worries were for naught, and his thoughts were proven correct. Goro was dead tired, but not enough to miss his wife's food and go straight to bed. Father and son didn't talk at all during the former's meal, or after that. They, both, basked in the comforting presence of the other as Goro, practically, devoured Akane's exquisite cooking. After that, Goro had a quick shower, before he went to sleep. His actions were followed by his son, even if the brunette had a shower earlier in the day. Unlike Goro, however, Issei prayed to every deity listening that he would meet the entity of his sacred gear, or whatever it was called, as he fell asleep. His prayers were answered when he reopened his eyes. He was left gobsmacked, with his eyes widened to the size of dinner plates and his jaw hanging loosely, upon meeting the sight in front of him. First of all, he was standing when there was no ground whatsoever to speak of. Secondly, there was a raging, brilliant crimson fire all around him. And if that wasn't intimidating enough, even if the flames couldn't harm him, the third and final thing he noticed most certainly was the lone, glowing, green reptilian eye that was 3 times bigger than himself was staring right back at him in wonder. Issei just wished there was a way out of this place, because, for the very first time, he felt afraid. Chapter 5. The flames all around Issei dispersed as if they were never there in the first place. The brunette's mind and heartbeat came to a stop at the sight in front of him. His eyes widened even more, and his jaw was somewhere around his legs, due to the sheer disbelief he was feeling at the moment. He had seen that kind of majestic, yet ferociously beautiful and a little more than intimidating creature in Zangetsu's memories, but he couldn't have expected to encounter one on his own. And, even though it was nowhere near as powerful as the one in the albino's memories, or even as big, it was really close to his own power to make the brunette afraid for his safety. The entity living inside him, apparently, was a freaking dragon. Including the long tail, this dragon was 50 meters tall, and its wingspan should be around 40 or so. The Dragon was of a dark crimson color and had eyes of the same shade, along with a long neck. Throughout its body, there were dark crimson and golden spikes. And, from the looks of things, it was a male dragon. Without Issei noticing, but the dragon certainly did, Zangetsu manifested himself right beside his wielder and, even though he was scared shitless, the albino just knew that this dragon wouldn't harm them. The dragon looked at them in what seemed to be wonder. Since he had been awakened, he had immersed himself in learning about his new host. Immediately, he had noticed that the brunette was absurdly powerful for someone his age. Not only that, the albino beside his host, as well as the other two powers, one of which managed to shock him, weren't powers from this world. And, to his further shock and disbelief on the matter, it was fucking Great Red the one who brought these powers in this world. An exceptionally strong sword spirit called Zangetsu. The power of a pirate king called Monkey D. Luffy, a headstrong, selfish and ambitious rubberman with 3 powers. Called Hockey, Armament, Observation and the Conqueror's Spirit. Last, but not least, a freaking dragon slayer, of all things, which was what shocked him in the first place, by the name of Natsu Dragneel. Each of them had several abilities and fighting techniques of their own, with the last one being the most powerful out of all 3. In fact, Natsu Dragneel's power alone was enough to put him close to the dragon's level. With the other 2 combined, his host was more powerful than him. At least, now. But he was sealed. And all of these powers were engraved in his host. Along with his own power. The only good thing about this host was that the brunette had a pure and kind heart. Meaning that all this power, including the dragon's own, would be used for a good purpose. Not that the dragon cared much about what his power would be used for. As long as he could win one over his rival, he was content. The stunned silence was broken by Issei, who had sank to his knees as he expressed his disbelief, still staring at the dragon in front of him in utter incomprehension. You've got to be fucking kidding me. A fucking dragon had been inside me since I was in my mother's womb, how all kinds of crazy is that? The dragon held back a snort of amusement. Though, he did grin a little, which showed 2 rows of deadly sharp fangs. Zangetsu, on the other hand, regained his composure. Yeah, why the fuck not an insanely super powerful dragon inside a ridiculously powerful teenager who is to become this world's ultimate hero at some point, so why not give said teenager even more power than he already has? The author of this shit must have all kinds of crazily weird shit in their fucking head, he deadpanned as he stared at the dragon. Ouch, that actually hurt. This time, the dragon laughed, with his loud booming laughter, making the other 2 shut their mouths in a millisecond flat. His amusement was palpable at their reactions. They had the whole package: fear, awe, disbelief and denial. Once the dragon's laughter died down, which calmed the other 2 down considerably, the former decided that it was time to introduce himself in the language the 2 in front of him spoke, Japanese. Greetings, my new host and the manifestation of my host sword. My name is Drake Gotch, or, simply, Drake. I am known as the Welsh Dragon, the Red Dragon. Emperor, or the Red Dragon of Domination, as well as one of the 2 heavenly dragons. In the Japanese term, I'm known as Sekuruyute. The now named Drake. Proclaimed proudly, yet formally, in his booming voice. Both Issei and Zangetsu had their eyes wide in awe and disbelief at the dragon's titles. They sounded, and probably were, strong and fitting for his appearance alone. Then, Issei remembered his manners and, as he stood up straight, albeit shakily, he bowed his head as a show of respect. I'm hi to Issei. He, mentally, cursed himself for stuttering at his introduction before he rose his head and locked gazes with the dragon. It's nice to meet you, Drake-san. He added as a show of goodwill. Albeit with a shaky smile. The albino didn't bow his head as he spoke. The name is Zangetsu. Ima Issei's sword spirit, as you said. However, the correct term is Zanpakuto, and I'm an extension to Issei's ol, like you are, Drake. He introduced himself in a serious voice. While not disrespectful, he sounded, at the very least, indifferent. His face and back were straight and fearless, with his arms crossed against his chest. Drake nodded in approval of their greetings. From what he had gathered when he snooped around with his eyes and senses, he expected the way they introduced themselves. Issei tried really hard not to squirm under the dragon's gaze. Thankfully, he had Zangetsu on his side, which calmed him down considerably. Still, though, he was pretty intimidated. It was for that reason he spoke uncertainly, albeit kindly, breaking the brief silence between them. Drake-san. Can you tell us anything about the supernatural world? And, while you're at it, Zangetsu butted in, almost rudely, gaining the attention of the other 2. You have to tell us what your power is. Also, if it's possible, tell us a way to hide Issei's power from the supernatural world, eyes and senses, all of it. He isn't ready to face them, despite his power. He, shamelessly, demanded, making his wielder balk at him in disbelief at his disrespect and directness. Greg didn't seem offended by Zangetsu's tone in the slightest. In fact, he seemed to approve of the albino's fearlessness. Also, he agreed with the Zanpakuto spirit. His host didn't seem ready to confront the supernatural world. Mentally, that is. The dragon nodded at their requests and demands before he took a seat as he spoke. Take a seat, you two. This will take a while. Issei and Zangetsu listened to the advice and exchanged uncertain glances before doing as they were told and looked at the dragon. They were very eager to learn about the supernatural of this world, as well as being told a way for Issei to remain undetected. Before we start though, do you have any knowledge for this world's mythology? Drake asked Issei, who nodded in affirmation. Good. Then it's very simple. Whatever mythologies you have read about or even heard of are as real as they can be. He paused in his explanation in order for his words to sink in their heads. Both widened their eyes in disbelief, meaning that Zangetsu had access to Issei's knowledge as well. Which was good, since he didn't have to explain everything from the very beginning. The Christian pantheon, Greeks, Norse, Hindu, Egyptians, Shinto, everything is real. The main pantheon, however, that is going to be troublesome for you, is going to be the Christian one. Though, that doesn't mean the other pantheons are insignificant. On the contrary, they are powerful in their own right. However, the Christian pantheon is the most crippled one because it consists of 3 different powers. The God of the Bible and his seraphs, along with a variety of angels, both strong and weak. The angels that lost their right to live in heaven due to succumbing to their sins and fell, thus earning the term fallen angels. None of these fallen were as strong as the God of the Bible, but some of them were equals to his seraphs. In addition, the difference between angels and fallen is the color of their wings. The angels have white, while the fallen have black. Last, but not least, are the devils, who, along with the fallen angels, reside in the underworld. The devils are weak to holy light and powers that come from angels and fallen alike. That said, if a devil is stronger than an angel, the former can win, despite their supposed weakness. All mythologies have one thing in common. Aside from the yokai and other species that are animal-like, they have the bodies and faces of a human. Another pause to his long and thorough explanation for the load of information to get in their heads. Once they nodded in understanding, Drake continued. In the supernatural world, there are several strong beings, even stronger than me and my host. That seemed to shock them tremendously, but he continued as if he hadn't dropped a bomb on their asses. There are other dragons as well, of course. But these are not a reason for concern, for the time being. Although, at a later time, we will discuss about other possible threats to my host's ultimate goal, to protect the world. For now, all you need to know about is why the Christian pantheon is the most immediate threat to your well-being. And this is where I come in as well. A very long time ago, when I was in my prime, I was one of the 10 strongest beings in the universe. My flames were, and probably still are, so strong that they would burn for days, and they even eradicated the souls of my opponents. After some time, I found another dragon at the same size as me. He was the first being that withstood my flames without even trying. At the same time, I was immune to his deadly poison. So, we decided to limit ourselves and fight without my flames and his poison. We had fought so many times that we created other abilities in order to defeat one another. However, none of us managed to overpower the other. We considered, and still do, ourselves rivals. This dragon's name is Albion and is, still, known as the White Dragon Emperor, or the Vanishing Dragon and, in the Japanese term, Hakuryuku. Albion was, also, considered one of the 10 strongest beings in the universe when we were in our prime. Greg paused once more in his history lesson, feeling a swell of pride wash over his being at the sheer awe his host and the spirit manifestation were displaying through their facial expressions. Both the aforementioned people turned a little somber upon seeing the dragon's expression begin to sour a couple of moments later, looking like his reminiscing took a bad turn. Which it did, by the way. As the saying goes, all good things must come to an end. It was the same for me and Albion. In our last battle, without us knowing, we had interrupted a war between the 3 factions of the Christian pantheon. The angels, fallen angels and the devils formed a temporary truce in order to subdue us. Naturally, Albion and I fought back. However, since we had limited ourselves, we forgot to use our main powers, my flames and Albion's poison. In the end, the three factions managed to, actually, destroy our bodies. Neither me nor Albion know how the war between the three factions ended. All we know is that it's called the Great War. The God of the Bible, though, sealed our souls in what is now known as sacred gears in order for the humans to have a way to defend themselves from the supernatural beings. Mine and Albion's are the only two known sacred gears with sentient beings residing in these sacred gears. Ours are two of the 13 known as Longinus class, otherwise known as weapons capable of killing God class beings. Albion's sacred gear is called Divine Dividing. Here, Drake's demeanor perked up once more as he stood proudly, making the other two eager to hear about the dragon's sacred gear and what it could do. Before I tell you about what the boosted gear, which is the name of the sacred gear I reside in, you need to know, from the start, that all sacred gears respond to the host's strong wishes and desires. Anyway, the boosted gear has the ability to boost the host's power by 2 every 10 seconds. If the host accumulates power for 1 minute, meaning 6 boosts, they can release it towards an enemy or transfer the power to an ally or a nearby object, which can be used as a weapon in order to temporarily boost their abilities. There are other abilities as well, but they won't be a concern for the time being. There is, however, a catch, for lack of a better word. The boosts a host can use depend on how strong they are. Also, the drawback from unthoughtful usage for the host is a severe case of exhaustion, which leaves them completely vulnerable to enemy attacks. Or, in the worst case scenario, the host's body collapses from the inside and dies. The dragon finished his explanation in a serious tone. Whereas, before, he was prideful as he explained his abilities. Issei and Zangetsu were both awed and skeptical. Even if Drake didn't say it out loud, the host could boost themselves indefinitely. It was both awesome as it was absolutely terrifying. Adding Drake's power to Issei's already massive one, the result could be catastrophic. However, since the brunette had no intention to destroy the world, they should be good. The two knew that the dragon had finished his long monologue and all the information had sank in their heads. They had taken it well, all things considered. They had a starting point as to whom Issei should be careful the most. Drake seemed clever enough to help the brunette and Zangetsu would do the same whenever he could. However, one issue remained. How would Issei conceal himself from the supernatural? And, now that they thought about it, how would Issei train his sacred gear? The brunette was the one to voice these questions. "Excuse me, Drake-san." He called out to the dragon, who hummed an acknowledgement. "Everything you told us is, admittedly, very useful to know. However, you didn't explain a way for me to hide my power from the supernatural, nor did you say if and where I could train the boosted gear." He pointed out kindly. "As of now, there is no need for you to train the boosted gear. The stronger your body is, the more boosts you can handle. Simple as that. Your transfer ability can be used whenever you find yourself an ally. All of your abilities, physical or otherwise, can be trained by myself and or the manifesting of your sword in here. You can get stronger by training with us in your mind, even if you won't realize it at first." Drake lectured patiently, glad that his host seemed to understand his reasoning by the nod of the latter's head and his serious expression. "As for your other request, me and your albino self can suppress your power from leaking out of your body. That said, we'll teach you how to do it on your own, subconsciously. However, as you grow even stronger than you are now, there will be beings that can detect your aura, or they'll be able to tell that you're a sacred gear user. Since you're this strong now, there won't be a supernatural being that cannot tell you're a sacred gear user, even if I suppress the feeling you give off. The aura of the Sekiryuite is too potent to hide. Although, there's no need to fret. Even if the supernatural finds you earlier than when you'll feel ready, I can help you through with that. Additionally, I'll teach you how to detect other supernatural presences and their intentions towards you." The dragon explained thoroughly, sounding wise in the process. Issei sighed in relief at what he heard. Zangetsu, aggressive and rough around the edges as he was, the brunette knew he would be helpful, like the dragon in front of them. Also, he wouldn't have to go to the gym, from what Drake told him. Which meant he could use the money for the surprise he wanted to do for his parents, a week in an overseas island, at a luxurious hotel. Preferably during the summer break, when their anniversary would be. That said, he needed twice the money he had at the moment. Which was a bummer. He would think of something at a later time. Right now, he needed to get ready, before he could introduce himself in the supernatural world. The brunette stood up straight, followed by his albino self, with a familiar feeling coursing throughout his being as he faced the dragon. A feeling he knew all too well. Zangetsu and Drake smirked in satisfaction upon seeing Issei's expression. Then, from tomorrow night, we'll get started. The sheer determination Issei emitted from his whole being that moment made the other two almost tremble in excitement at what was to come. Issei woke up from his sleep, feeling a little overwhelmed by the ordeal he had in his supposed dream. He sighed lightly as he got up and stretched his whole body, hearing satisfying pops all throughout before he rubbed the sleep out of his eyes. As soon as he finished that, his eyes landed on a certain object that was, innocently, sitting on his desk right beside the laptop. He might as well have teleported to his desk with how fast he went there to pick it up. A very happy yet cunning smirk appeared on his lips as he rose it to his eye level. It was the dojo's recommendation that he could become a shushu if he ever wished. That's it. He refrained himself from yelling in his excitement. After all, he didn't want his parents to suspect anything. That's the way to earn the money I need for my parents' present. He jovially muttered under his breath. All he needed to do was to present this official paper, not a copy of it, to his paperwork on his first day of high school. Though, he needed to keep a copy, or 10, to himself. To his knowledge, Kuo Academy housed a kendo club. His only problem would be if the student council president and the principal approved of his request. Hopefully, he could convince them when the time comes. Chapter 6. 2 weeks passed by quite quickly for Issei. All this time, he could only count positive things happening in his life. First and foremost, by the time the first week went by, his father got the promotion. Goro was, still, a salaryman, but he would have more responsibilities and, thus, he would be paid quite handsomely for them. Also, he wouldn't have to work overtime. Unless it was absolutely necessary. Which brought the second good thing. His parents' relationship came back to normal, only with slightly more sex at night, in order to catch up their lost time from one another. His father had even managed to astonish his mother and Issei himself by going shopping with her. The guy always tried to find an excuse to not go shopping with his wife. After all, almost all the girls, no matter their age, take their sweet time, which results in making the guys bored to their bones. And back. Issei had his special scarf given to him by his mother at the time the latter had told him. It wasn't anything special in the sense of the word itself, though. It was a handmade gift from his mother herself. That was what made the scarf special. The scarf was 2 meters long and, mostly, white in color. His mother had made it so it looked like it had a scaly pattern, with black string separating the white scales. And, to top it off, a cane had used red string to sew Issei on both sides of the scarf. What was interesting about his name, though, was that a cane had made it looking like it was an Eastern-style dragon shaped. In her son's name. Truly difficult, almost impossible, but the Haidu matriarch never even felt the challenge, since she had put all her love and devotion onto it. Issei absolutely adored it as soon as he had laid his eyes on it. He had even teared up and thanked his mother repeatedly while crashing her in his embrace. Goro had been no better in the tearing up department, but his overall reaction was quite comical. The man had cried a couple of waterfalls in manly tears, exclaiming that his son was trying to steal his wife and that he accepted the challenge. The cane had never smiled so radiantly in her entire life, including her wedding day and the day her son was born. She had felt truly happy that day. What would make her the embodiment of happiness would be the time her son introducing her to her first grandbaby, either a boy or a girl, she didn't care. As long as she had grandbabies to spoil, everything would be fine in the world. So, for Issei, everything was fine. That, of course, included his training with Zangetsu and Drake, as well as his small excursions on the hill to train his kendo and hand-to-hand skills. As for the training with the other two, he both hated and enjoyed it because the albino and the dragon were slave drivers. When it came to serious training, he had even managed to suppress his aura to the absolute minimum, even in his sleep, by the end of the first week. Something that confirmed the term slave drivers for the teachers. If there was one thing Issei didn't like throughout the 2 weeks, was that he couldn't train his dragon-slaying abilities with either of his teachers. For Drake, the reason was obvious: dragons and dragon-slaying abilities weren't meant to meet one another unless somebody wanted the head of a dragon. For Zangetsu, it was a little more complicated. They couldn't train the brunette's dragon-slaying abilities at the world Issei and the albino had met due to the danger of destroying the unnaturally tall oak tree, which would result in Issei losing his sanity. Also, they couldn't do it where the two had met Drake, with or without the dragon's presence there. With Drake, the reason was obvious, as stated before. Without Drake, however, the dragon-slaying power would affect Drake's realm, which, in turn, would affect the dragon himself, which, in turn, would affect the boosted gear and, lastly, Issei himself. In a very negative way. So, the trio agreed that Issei would use his dragon-slaying abilities whenever he deemed necessary. Unless the brunette found a place to train said power. It wasn't like it would diminish. As long as Issei got stronger, so would his power. The only thing he had to do, under Drake's suggestion on the matter, was a couple of hours meditation, focusing only in that hour and absolutely nothing else. It was easy enough to accomplish on a daily basis since he was on spring break. The challenge would be when the school year started. Other than all of that, there had been a conversation with his parents, with the brunette suggesting to use his recommendation in his new school, hoping to get paid for it in order for his mother and father to live more comfortably, as well as himself. Becoming a little independent. It hadn't been something the Haidu parents expected, but didn't deny him the right to, at least, attempt it. And, if everything went well, they would see where it would go from there. Issei had been happy about their support. That said, he hadn't told them that he had gone and purchased his Kuo Academy uniforms, tracksuits and shorts all on his own, several pieces in fact, at the start of the second week. The shopping hadn't stopped there, though. He had had to buy several matching pairs of underwear and socks, as well as t-shirts. After all, he had only bought the summer version of his Kuo Academy clothes. Except from the tracksuits, they looked cool in his opinion. For future reference, the Kuo Academy's clothes slightly differ from girls to boys, as well as the versions between summer and winter. Winter version for boys. It consists of a black blazer with white accents over a white long-sleeve button-down shirt with vertical linings, a black ribbon on the collar, matching black pants and brown dress shoes. Winter version for girls. It consists of a white long-sleeve button-down shirt with vertical linings, a black ribbon on the collar, a black shoulder cape and matching button-down corset and, lastly, a magen skirt with white accents. Summer version for boys and girls. It's, mostly, the same as the winter version. The boys discard the blazer, while the girls do. The same for the shoulder cape. Other than that, the button-down shirts, for both genders, are short-sleeved. As for gym clothes, it goes like this. In winter, the girls wear a pink and white tracksuit with black accents, while the boys wear the gray tracksuit with identical features. In summer, the girls wear navy blue bloomers, while the boys wear shorts of the same color, with both genders wearing a short-sleeved t-shirt with navy blue accents and the Kuo Academy emblem embroidered on the front left side. In both seasons, both genders are obligated to wear navy blue and white sneakers. And the protagonist of this story had decided to wear the summer versions all the time. Although, he would forego the black ribbon and he would replace it with his scarf. He would keep the ribbon in his bag, should it be a problem that he wouldn't be wearing it. Once he had told that to his parents, he had expected them to berate him for delinquent behavior and the like. However, to his pleasant surprise, they had supported him in that as well. Another reason to love them all the more, he guessed. As well as earn the 60,000 yen he had spent on his clothes to put them back in his allowance for his parents' surprise on his part to come to fruition. And, if his father would continue to give him some money, the goal would come easier into view. That said, even if he didn't manage to do so in his first year, there were always another 2 years for him in high school. Not to mention he was just about to enter his first one. There was plenty of time for him to accumulate the necessary amount of money for his parents' surprise. Zangetsu and Drake, in commemoration of their wielder's first day in high school, had told him that Issei could take the last day as a day off from his training. Something which almost made him tear up. Keyword being almost. After all, well, slave drivers, Issei liked to spend time with both Zangetsu and Drake as they trained and had fun sparring one another. Or, on some occasions, the brunette and the albino against a dragon, in order for the first one to test the transfer ability of the boosted gear. Unfortunately for the two teachers, though, the good times didn't erase the fact that their methods of teaching him were bad at best, even when they lectured him. So, generally, Issei had a very good time on his break. There was one small issue, though. How would Issei carry his sealed sword in his bag, or on himself in general, without tipping off the supernatural beings out there? The answer to that was simple, according to Zangetsu. Issei would leave the sword on his bed, with his window slightly opened. A cane wouldn't go in his room, since the brunette kept it clean and tidy, so there was no problem from there. However, if something of supernatural nature happened outside of his home, Issei would, mentally, command his sword to come to his side, thus the opened window As for why the sword should stay in his room in the first place, Zangetsu would manifest himself and take care of whatever would could pose a threat to his parents in his absence. But that said, Issei, still, wasn't ready to confront the supernatural. Drake had given many lectures on the subject and the brunette had got everything easily in his head, except from one thing. Issei wasn't ready to take a life, or ever wanted to for that matter, should the need arise. Yet, Zangetsu and Drake hoped that Issei's first kill would come sooner rather than later. Otherwise, the brunette wouldn't survive the supernatural world, mentally that is. It was his first day of high school, and Issei woke up an hour earlier than usual, for school that is, thanks to his alarm clock. The brunette had a shower and got ready for school really quickly because he wanted to have some spare time to look around. Or, if he was lucky, talk to the person responsible for the kendo club. Breakfast in his house that day was a quiet affair on his part. He had gotten up earlier than his mother, so he made his own breakfast and prepared a couple of sandwiches for lunch break. Aside from the time he had a shower, he made no noise whatsoever. Not even a soft click from the front door was heard in the house when he left. He did, however, leave a note to his parents that he had already left for school, explaining the reason he did so. Just as he had reached the school, which, thankfully, had opened its doors, he heard his mother crying like a baby that was denied its favorite toy. He, mentally, apologized to his mother. Though, he knew he would get an earful as soon as she would get a glimpse of him. When he got back, that made him sigh softly in fondness before wearing a matching smile as he got inside the building. According to his ears, he was the first student to arrive. Aside from the ones in the student council, of course. Which was where he was heading to, since that was the only place he could hear people from. Not to mention they, probably, were the only people who could help him with the recommendation issue. He made no sound as he walked through corridors and ascended the stairs. And, thanks to the building's emptiness of students, at this early time, he reached his destination quite quickly. The brunette stiffened as soon as he got outside of the student council room. According to what he could sense, all the people inside were non-humans. Devils. All of them. Though, two of them have another feeling as well. One is, most likely, an Ekamati Yaokai of some kind and the other, most definitely, a fallen angel. Also, aside from two pure-blooded devils, most of them feel like humans turned devils, which is most curious. Drake supplied the information as if he was talking about the weather, talking to Issei through the latter's mind. He was, also, interested in how most of them gave the distest feeling of a devil, despite their other species, human or otherwise. Thanks Drake, that really helped, Issei replied, sarcastically, to the dragon in his head. Though, even if he didn't voice it, he was curious about Drake's observations as well. However, this mystery would be solved in the future, and both knew it. So, it wasn't an immediate concern. Don't mention it, partner. Since you got the first feel, perceive, you'll be able to tell whoever is human or not. And you'll be able to tell the differences between the devils and their counterparts, angels and fallen, when the time comes. Not to mention other supernatural species. If Drake was offended by Issei's sarcasm, he didn't show it. Instead, he lectured him in the wise tone as he was used to do. Issei just gave a mental sigh at that. As if the problem was that in the first place. Oh, cheer up, King. Zangetsu butted in like an excited child. Even if they're gonna peg you as a sacred gear user, they'll discard you as wielding a weak one. He said confidently, knowing what his wielder was concerned with. Hopefully, you're right, Issei sighed, not feeling ready to encounter anyone from the supernatural world yet. It's as the sword says. Said sword didn't take kindly to be referred to as such and started cursing. Like, really cursing. Nevertheless, the dragon continued as if the albino's temper tantrum wasn't even happening. The same with Issei, he had got very used to Zangetsu's behavior. However, should there be a problem, I'll help you find your way out, without yourself getting noticed as a supernatural being. The dragon added, sincerely. Issei gave a mental sigh of relief at that. Thanks, partner. I, really, appreciate it. Think nothing of it, partner. Just do what you have to do and we'll get you out of trouble, should it come, of course. Drake spoke casually. Yeah. Just like the lizard said. Zangetsu gave his input grumpily, still annoyed about the sword comment. Nonetheless, Issei appreciated it all the more. Again, thanks, guys. Taking a silent deep breath after he finished his mental conversation with his partners and exhaling it slowly to calm his final nerves, the brunette knocked on the door. That said, he wasn't looking forward to his first meeting with the supernatural. Especially when he heard a very familiar voice. Calling, "Enter." In a strict and businesslike tone from behind the door. Well, here we go. Chapter 7. There were several people inside the student council office. Interestingly enough, only one of them was a boy. The rest were girls. With Sitri Sona Shitori Sauna, Gremory Rias. Imijima Keno and Shinra Tsubaki being the only people already known to you. Dibayudo, the only male of the people inside the office, was a handsome young man with short blonde hair, blue eyes and a mole underneath his left eye. He was a first high school year in Kuo Academy. Tsubasa Yura is a tall tomboyish girl with blue shoulder-length hair, matching eyes, Bishounen face and, for her height, a modest and fitting bust. Also a first year in the academy. The young and beautiful girl, named Hanakai Momo, with white hair, blue-green eyes, cute face and generous bust. Another first year by the name of Kusaka Ria. She had a slim figure, playfully cute face, generous bust and long brown hair that ends in two short braids and matching eyes. As an accessory, she wore a blue headband. There was a person, though, that wasn't supposed to be with them there. And, despite their appearance as a grade schooler, they were, still, just a year away from being a first high school year student. All this introduction went for one Taoju Kaneko. A cute petite girl with golden eyes and a bust size she was self-conscious about, along with her height. Her white hair, at the front, had two long bangs going past her shoulders. And several loose bangs hanging over her forehead, while the back had a short bob cut. Her accessories were two black cat-shaped hair clips on either side of her hair. Aside from Kaneko, who was just sitting on a couch and munched some cookies served just for her, and Sona, who was sitting behind her desk as the student council president and filled some paperwork for the beginning of the school year, as well as Rias, who enjoyed, quietly, some tea made by Akeno. Everybody else were given the task of checking their paperwork. Knock knock knock. All activity came to an abrupt stop, with all heads raising or turning to look at the door in a questioningly suspicious manner. Aside from Kaneko, of course, who continued munching on her cookies without a care in the world. She knew her priorities well. Sona fixed her glasses and put on her usual strict expression before calling the intruder inside enter. With a matching tone as she put her elbows on her desk and intertwined her fingers in front of her nose and mouth, in order to hide half of her expression. None of the people inside expected for a brunette about their age to come inside and rival Yudo in looks, albeit the former was on the roguish side, while the latter was princely. Also, while Yudo's figure was athletic, the brunette's was lean and muscular. Good morning and excuse my intrusion. As soon as he entered, the brunette bowed his head as he greeted. Apologetically, albeit smoothly. He raised his head and, immediately, his sharp dark green eyes locked with Sona's piercing dark blue ones as he closed the door behind him without even looking. My name is Issei and I'm the first year student here, starting today. Nice to meet you, Kaichu. Without looking elsewhere, the brunette managed to take everybody else's appearances from his peripheral vision. Everyone noticed how silent he was in his moves, from walking in and the door closing, all the way to them not noticing he was outside the room. They were weary and for a good reason. For a human, this Issei was very abnormal, despite how well-mannered and friendly he seemed to be. Also, he made it a point to ignore everyone else, which was both okay and infuriating for the prideful devils. Even Kaneko stopped for a moment to spare him a glance, which he paid no mind to, before she continued munching on her snacks. That said, the high school devils of the academy recognized his name from somewhere. Good morning, Haidu-san. Sona greeted him with a nod, sounding indifferent towards him. Is there something you need from the student council? She asked out of politeness and to get straight to the point. She wanted her paperwork finished before the school was swarmed with students. Indeed, Kaichu. Issei nodded affirmatively as he presented a folder with his paperwork. He had already pegged her as the Sona from the hill, which he was, barely, able to restrain himself from addressing her as. There is something I need to consult you about. He explained vaguely. Noticing his lack of fidgeting, Sona guessed he didn't mind the presence of others while they talked. That, however, didn't mean she wouldn't address it. Do you mind the presence of everybody else, Haidu-san, or do you want to talk in private? She asked, stoically, as her eyes were locked with the brunette's. As a matter of fact, I don't mind. He replied with a nonchalant shrug of his shoulders, not breaking eye contact. That said, he did mind, but didn't want to sound rude to the others' presence. He didn't show it, but he was extremely nervous. Especially when most of the people inside the room were beautiful girls. So, he hid his nervousness under a calm and collected facade, focusing only on the person he wanted to address, in order to not show anything suspicious to the devils. "Then, please, take a seat, Haidu-san." Sona gestured him to have a seat at the opposite chair of the one Ria's occupied, right in front of the former's desk. Issei just nodded and did as told, idly noting how comfortable his chair was, still not breaking eye contact with Sona, but took notice how everyone was interested in their conversation. He passed a folder to the student council president, "And you'll find out what I need to discuss with you as you read my file, Kaichu," he said calmly. Sona nodded at his request and got to work. Seeing the opportunity to make the rest known, Riaz cleared her throat to get his attention. She was slightly surprised that he turned his head enough to just look at her. "Pleasure to meet you, Haidu-kun. My name is Gremory Riaz and I am a second-year student in this academy. Also, I am the president of the Occult Research Club." She greeted him politely, albeit with an elegance and formality that befitted a girl of her beauty. Her smile was also quite a beautiful sight. Issei was, internally, somewhat irked by the familiarity the admittedly beautiful Reed showed to him. Also, he took notice of everyone else, aside from the youngest of the group, getting ready to introduce themselves. It was only because he wanted to have the names of the devils that he didn't ignore them anymore. That said, he filed the club Riaz was the president of at the back of his mind for future reference. One by one, the person he looked at greeted him kindly with a small bow and a smile. Well, except for Makeno, who was a little playful, and Kaneko, who barely spoke in an even monotone, both of whom spoke last before Sona herself. As for Yuudo, who spoke first, he smiled charmingly. "Good morning, Haidu-san. My name's Yuudo Kiba, a first-year student like you and a member of the Occult Research Club. I hope we get along. I'm Kusaka Ria, a first year as well and a member of the student council. Nice to meet you, Haidu-san. The name's Tsubasa Yara, a first year and a member of the student council. Let's get along, Haidu-san. My name is Momo Hanakai, and I am a first-year student in the academy, as well as a member of the student council. I hope we get along, Haidu-san. Good day, Haidu-san. My name is Shinra Tsubaki, a second-year student and the vice president of the student council. It is a pleasure to meet you. UFU good morning, Haidu-ku, and my name's Himejima Keno, a second-year student and the vice president of the Occult Research Club. I hope we get along, WELL. Kaneko Taoju. Junior High. Nice to meet you." Throughout their introductions, Issei noticed several things. First and foremost, Riaz, Tsubaki and, finally, Akeno, along with Sona, were the ones from the hill. Secondly, very few knew how to properly introduce themselves in the Japanese way. Thirdly, Akeno had the ideal appearance and mannerisms of a Yamato Nadeshiko, and she was the only one speaking fluent Japanese. Also, she was the one that Drake pointed out to be a mix with a fallen angel. He didn't care about why the youngest of these devils was there, but she was the other abnormality, being the Nekomata of some kind. That said, even if they were all devils, they were polite towards him. So, he stood up and slightly bowed his head as he responded to their politeness. "A pleasure to meet you all. Let's get along from now on." Their attention, including the brunettes, was taken by a soft thud coming from Sona, who had just closed the folder. Her face set in stone, she introduced herself in her usual stoic tone. "My name is Sana Shitori. I am a second-year student and the president of the student council." Issei just corrected the way he would address her in his mind before he sat back down. "So, what do you say? Shitori Kaichu?" he asked evenly, trying to hide his eagerness. Sona fixed her glasses, buying this minuscule amount of time to collect her thoughts before she talked to him. His style was impressive for a human, especially since he was the only one besides herself to reach top scores in the entrance exams. So much so that he piqued her interest enough to consider recruiting him. However, she wanted to see for herself what he was capable of. "To tell you the truth, Haidu-san, I am impressed that you managed to have the same scores as myself in the entrance exams." She paused in order for her words to sink in the minds of everybody else, especially Riaz. She was, internally, amused from the widening of their eyes, as well as the brunette's rising of an eyebrow, as if saying so. "What?" "That said, I'm very interested in your proposal," she announced. After all, the academy lacked a specialist. In kendo, both Sona and Issei had started another stare-off without any malice leaking out of either of them. "If you don't mind me asking," Riaz interjected politely, her interest obvious for everyone to see. "What is this proposal about?" Without breaking eye contact, for reasons unknown to both parties, Sona was the one to answer. "Haidu-san. Here has a recommendation to become a shishu in kendo, should he want it." Even Kaneko widened her eyes in disbelief at the information. At that young of an age, the brunette would have to be exceptional in kendo to receive such a recommendation. The most shocked in the room was Yudo, who prided himself to be a very proficient swordsman. And he had been taught by a true master of swordsmanship for years when he was younger. The idea that a human, seemingly, surpassed him in skill was ludicrous at best. Nobody voiced their thoughts on the matter, though. And since the school lacks a person for this position, Sona continued, herself and Issei unaware of what they had created in the heads of the other devils. "Haidu-san seems to be the person the school was looking for," she finished. And, for the first time in this discussion, Sona allowed herself to smile. Not that she showed it, of course. It was too early for that. Further shock was spread at her announcement inside the heads of the devils, but they held themselves. Issei, for his part, kept himself from grinning in satisfaction. The young woman before him was smart, he could see that from their ongoing stare-off. So, he should play it safe for the entirety of the conversation. "I appreciate your kind words, Shitori Kaichu," he said earnestly, earning the attention of everyone. "However, there are a couple of problems, since I am a student and a minor," he said seriously. He was good, Sona had to admit. And responsible. And smart. But, mostly, good. The times that you could be needed to the kendo club might be overlapped by your classes and vice versa. "That and your payment," she said. Matter-of-factly. Issei, simply, nodded in agreement to her statement. After all, they weren't minor issues. Exactly. Sona fixed her glasses before leaning forward, thus revealing her whole face, shocking almost everyone that she was smiling. Her opponent in the stare-off wasn't one of the shocked people, which pleased her, for some reason. "Then, what would you suggest if you were in my shoes, Haidu-san?" she asked stoically, despite her smile. "She's testing me," for some reason Issei thought, somewhat unsettled. His calm and collected facade didn't break. Though, as he answered honestly, "If the school appointed me as a kendo shishu, I should be obligated to attend to the club at its designated hours. And, if I had classes at the same time, then the assignments from the teachers should be given to me through the student council. As for the payment, it's up to the school's discretion." "Excellent." Sona kept herself from outright grinning. If it was fate or something else, she didn't care. She had found someone she could call, even at first glance so to speak, a match. Issei liked the satisfied glint in her eyes, but kept himself from celebrating. As for everyone else, they felt unsettled that there was somebody, no matter that it was a human, who could match Sona word for word. Riaz felt a little jealous that she hadn't found someone in the same sense, yet. However, the brunette visibly surprised them, even Sona, when he continued speaking. "I'm not stupid enough to believe that, should we have a deal, there won't be a catch of some kind." He finished his thoughts on the matter in a serious tone. Sona, barely, restrained herself from trembling in excitement. Even if it was such a simple matter, it was the first time she had fun in a conversation outside of her banters with Riaz since their childhood over chess. In truth, she didn't want this conversation to end, even as she kept her small smile in place. "That is true, unfortunately. As you said, Haidu-san, you are a minor. So, getting paid will be somewhat of a problem. However, if you do some of the other clubs, including the student council's chores, it would be considered that you do community service, and thus, earning your payment without issue. As for what would happen should your club hours and classes overlapped one another, you're correct on the course of action that we, as the student council, will take," she explained thoroughly, her voice stoic as usual. In truth, Issei didn't mind the arrangement. However, he knew she could make it so he wouldn't miss any of his classes or club hours. No reason to push his luck, though. So, with a small smile of his own, he presented his right hand for a shake to seal the deal. "If that's what it takes, then you have yourself a deal, Shitori Kaichu." Despite his smile, his tone matched Sona's stoicism. Sona used her delicate right hand to shake the one presented before her. "Pleasure to do business with you, so to speak, Haidu-kun." Everybody noticed the difference in the suffix she used to address him, which managed to surprise him, but not in a bad way. Issei stood up at the same time with Sona, their hands, still, clasped in a firm handshake and their unflinching eyes locked in a stare-off. "The pleasure is all mine, Shitori Kaichu," he said kindly. They released each other at the same time and then, with a small bow of his and a good day to you all, he left. The same way he had entered. Soundlessly. Everybody waited some moments for the brunette to get out of hearing range for the inevitable conversation on what transpired to begin. Sona sat back on her comfortable chair, keeping that smile on her face as she fixed her glasses before she crossed her arms under her chest. The awkward, for everyone else, silence was broken by the beautiful Redeed. "You liked him?" Ria stated matter-of-factly before she sipped the last of her tea to hide a teasing smile. Was it that obvious? Sona didn't bother to deny it. Instead, her smile widened as she gazed at the door. Ria's and everyone else were flag-basted at her response and the fact that Sona didn't deny the claim. In fact, Sona surprised them even more as she continued speaking with a fondness Ria's, or anyone else for that matter, had never heard her using in her speech. This simple conversation was just a test to see his intelligence. Which he passed with flying colors, mind you. Haidu-kun knows what he's doing and what he's saying. He, also, probably, knows that'll help his schedule for his classes to not overlap with his club hours. She explained. I think it was quite obvious. Ria's agreed easily with a small smile, hiding the fact that she was jealous of her childhood friend and rival. Also, there wasn't a single person that didn't agree with that statement. What he doesn't know, Sona said softly and, for the first time since Issei's appearance, she faced her friend, is that I will not have him do any chores for the other clubs. He will be helping only the student council with mundane chores, she said confidently. Ria's wasn't as smart as Sona, but caught the hidden message. You'll try to recruit him, she stated matter-of-factly. The smile fading completely from her face. Sona didn't lose her smile as she spoke. I won't deny it, Ria's. I really want to recruit Haidu-kun, even as we speak, she said honestly, before her demeanor turned serious in half a millisecond flat. However, since I know the problem you will, undoubtedly, face in the future, I am willing to be patient for a couple of years. Especially since Haidu-kun seems to be a sacred gear holder, although not awakened yet. So, in that sense, you can say that you have a claim on him. A claim that will change hands should your problem is, somehow, resolved later than our graduation as high school students. Ria's felt truly surprised and elated that her friend was willing to go that far for her. It showed that, despite her strict and professional personality, Sona had a kind heart, like herself. Which, for devils, was very rare. Thank you, Sona. You have no idea how much I appreciate it. The Redeed said sincerely with a small bow of her head to show the respect her friend deserved. The conversation ended there and the school day was about to begin. So, wordlessly, Kaneko left the student council office and went to the section of the junior high school. In her mind, however, there was only one person. Issei Haidu. Despite how much she hated her inherent power, Kaneko, from the moment the guy had stepped inside the room the devils occupied, could tell that he was obscenely powerful. Even all of them combined wouldn't be able to scratch him. Yet, she couldn't bring herself to rat him out to the others. Despite his stoic facade, she could only feel good sentiments coming off from his being, such as kindness, gentleness and selflessness. It was for that reason she didn't say anything, neither to her king, nor Sona Kaichu. For now, that is. People and feelings change, depending on the circumstances. So, she hoped they wouldn't have to face him any time soon. Such a powerful being should be their ally. And her king was in dire need of such a person, even if there was, still, time for that event to come. Issei felt calm as he relaxed at the base of a tree, which was behind the building he was, previously, inside of. It was a good thing he had sensitive ears, meaning that he had heard their conversation after he left from the student council office. There would be a conversation with Drake that night in order to hear the dragon's thoughts on the matter. For the time being, though, he had classes to attend to and new people to meet and interact with. He hoped he would have the same classes as that Kiba guy because, honestly, he didn't think he could get through the school year without a familiar face. After all, aside from Rin, Issei had grown up without friends. Kiba seemed to be a good guy. So, in a school full of girls, it would be a good thing to have some company with another male. That said, he hoped the students in this school wouldn't be afraid of him or give him names like what had happened in his elementary and middle school years. He shook his head lightly to throw away these thoughts before he stood up and dusted off his pants. With a small sigh of uncertainty, Issei ignored the sounds of the students that occupied the front yard and went towards them in the same way as usual, without making a sound. Hopefully, at the end of the day, he wouldn't be a mess on the inside. Otherwise, Zangetsu and Drake would have their work cut out for them. Chapter 8. The first day of school finished without an incident, something for which Issei was really grateful. That is, aside from a couple of weird things. 1. By the end of the day, he was known throughout the academy for his looks alone. The perpetrators were the girls, of course. 2. Issei himself and that devil, Kibayudo, had become public enemies number 1 for the other boys in school. Because, due to their looks, most of the female populace wanted to become their girlfriends. Not that Issei cared about that. If a girl wanted to become his girlfriend, they would have to know each other first. And not base a relationship on looks alone. That said, the moniker that a girl named Ikakiryu gave him from out of nowhere didn't help matters at all. The Dragon of Kuo. And Kiba was the Prince of Kuo. Apparently, their nicknames came from their behavior at first glance. Kiba had this gentlemanly aura and kind smile, as well as the matching behavior to confirm his title. Issei, on the other hand, was indifferent to everyone. And didn't talk much, even though he didn't seem unfriendly at all in the first place. So, while Kiba was easy to approach and talk to, Issei was the opposite, according to Kiryu Aika, who added Issei's pretty intimidating physique and overall appearance as a factor to why she created his nickname. At least, he wasn't bothered from people asking him stupid questions all day long, like Kiba. The funny part from all this was that neither Kiba nor this Kiryu Aika person were in his class. He would have liked to have Kiba in his class, though. The guy seemed okay in Issei's book. Instead, he was stuck with 2 open perverts in the same class as him. Mitsuda and Motohama. Issei didn't bother to remember their full names. After all, they didn't deserve proper respect from anyone. And, from the very first moment they declared their passions, the girls hated the duo's guts. And Kiryu Aika, who had a knack for creating names, dubbed them the perverted duo. That said, Issei appreciated their honesty, even if it was for a subject he didn't particularly like to discuss. And the 2 perverts were bold enough to declare their hatred for his mere existence, which, in turn, made the girls hate them even more. Issei had been used to that kind of mentality from people, especially his own age, since he was a kid. So, he didn't mind much. At least, again, he was left on his own devices. Anyway, the school day consisted of a tour throughout the day for the first years in order for them to become accustomed to all the grounds Kuo Academy had to offer. And the place was huge. So, it took the better part of the day for the task to be completed by their homeroom teachers. That way, Issei became aware of the kendo club's whereabouts and its structure, so he wouldn't, accidentally, enter the girls' locker room and cause a scene. He just knew, however, that Mitsuda and Motohama would try and sneak a peek from the girls, while they would change their clothes. Also, it would come to himself to solve the problem. Well, as the saying goes, he would wait and see. The brunette, after having a pleasant dinner with his parents, had a shower and went to bed in order to communicate with his 2 tenants in his soul. First, though, after his refreshing shower, he meditated for a couple of hours on his dragon-slaying power. On a side note, he was glad that his parents hadn't pestered him about the school day, even though he had expected them to do so. A couple of moments after he closed his eyes, Issei reopened them to find himself at the familiar side of Drake. Looking at him, Zangetsu appeared a moment later beside him at his right. All 3 took a seat at the non-ground in a triangular fashion. In hindsight, it was comical how such a thing was possible, especially for the dragon. "You know what I'm here for, you 2. Issei stated matter-of-factly as he looked at the other 2 in the eyes. "It's as we said, they pegged you for a sacred gear user." Zangetsu started seriously. "And, even though you got their attention, you're off the hook. For now, at least." Be that as it may, Drake agreed in his own way, earning their attention. "There is a problem." He finished his statement in a serious tone, getting questioning expressions from both listeners before presenting his case in the same demeanor. "The last time I encountered devils, even through my past hosts, they were all pure-blooded. Today, Issei was in a devil's den, with only 2 being such. The question is how they made devils out of other species. Also, aside from Taoju and Himajima girls, that Kiba boy was a sacred gear user. Definitely not a Longinus wielder, but a sacred gear user nonetheless. The contemplative silence befell the trio. It was a surprise in Issei's mind that Kiba was a sacred gear user, but it wasn't the main problem. There must be a way for the devils to turn other species into devils as well. Issei broke the silence with a thoughtful look on his face. Obviously, Zangetsu said sarcastically as he crossed his arms against his chest with a huff. What we need to know is which way is that, he added in an irritated fashion. Issei ignored the sword spirit in order to keep his temper in check and his mind clean. The only clues we have up until now, Drake gained their attention with his serious voice, is that these devils want to recruit Issei. Each for their personal use, which is fitting for their nature. That in their ability to turn other species into devils through unknown, to us, means. The dragon paused and focused only on Issei. That said, partner, they will let you have your freedom for the time being. However, since that Sona girl was so interested in you, you have to be careful in your interactions with her and her followers if you want to stay hidden for the foreseeable future. He warned the brunette sternly. Issei nodded in agreement to that. Even if he was interested in Sona himself, he needed to lay low in order to keep the devil's attention off of him. He was smart, but so was Sona. And he didn't want someone like that to be onto him. Not until he was ready, that is. Zangetsu had enough of the serious staff and dematerialized himself from Drake's domain. He would listen from his own world. The brunette and the dragon could only sweat drop at the sword spirit's childish behavior. Truth be told, though, there was nothing else to discuss. So, Issei used the spare time to spar with Drake before doing the same with Zangetsu. The next day, Issei went to school at the same time as the day before. To his relief, it seemed that there were only 2 people in the student council office, where he went to as soon as he entered the school grounds. Through his sense of smell alone, he could tell that these people were Sona and Tsubaki. He knocked on the door 3 times before Sona's enter was heard. The devil girls were, visibly, surprised to see him 2 days in a row. Not to mention at the same time as the day before. They gained their composure almost immediately, though. Sona, who was, internally, glad for some reason, broke the brief silence that befell the group. Good morning. Haidu-kun. She greeted him in her usual tone and a matching expression. What can I or the student council do for you? She asked, hiding her genuine curiosity under the mask of her business-like attitude as she gestured for him to have a seat in front of her desk. Good morning, Shitori Kaichu, Shinrafuka Keichu. Issei greeted them in the same tone as Sona with a small bow of his head before accepting the former's invitation. Tsubaki just nodded at him in acknowledgement. Not that he paid her more than a glance. After all, he had started another menacing stare-off with the student council president. I'm here to get my schedule, Shitori Kaichu. All the students, except from me, received theirs from the homeroom. Teachers. I suppose it has something to do with yesterday's proposition that you felt obligated to give my schedule. Yourself. The brunette explained calmly, knowing that she had done this on purpose. He knew that he had gotten her attention and, if she was as smart as he thought she was, it wouldn't take long for her to be onto him. So, he needed her off his back, despite how much she interested him. Without breaking eye contact, Sona opened a drawer from her desk and got a small folder from inside it, before closing said drawer and gave the file to Issei, who, in the same fashion, took it and put it in his bag. And this was done without exchanging a word. Throughout this small exchange, Tsubaki felt like a third wheel, for some reason. Thank you, Shitori Kaichu. The brunette said appreciatively with a small bow of his head before he got up. For the briefest of moments, when their eyes weren't locked in a stare-off, Sona allowed her eyes to see his overall form. Something which allowed her to take notice of the brunette's scarf that, apparently, had replaced his ribbon. Where is your ribbon, Haidu-kun? She asked sternly, her eyes behind her red-framed glasses narrowing a fraction. She took her role as the student council president very seriously, and not even her person of great interest would be excused from the school's rules. Tsubaki felt like facepalming. She knew that her king was interested in the brunette, but to just notice the scarf on his neck was just sad. Issei didn't hesitate for a second at his answer. The ribbon is in my bag, should the scarf made by my mother's hands be a problem for the school. He said honestly, not at all intimidated by her expression. Tsubaki knew who was the winner of the discontinued argument even before she heard her king exhaling a sigh through her nose. Fine. Sona returned to being businesslike. As long as you keep the rest of your uniform on, like as you are now. You have nothing to worry about, Haidu-kun. Again, thank you, Shitori Kaichu. Issei nodded his head in appreciation before taking his leave the usual way. While also feeling Sona's gaze on the back of his head. A few seconds passed before Sona allowed herself to lean back on her chair and relax her posture as she crossed her arms under her chest and adorned a thoughtful expression. As if sensing her unease, Tsubaki spoke. What is on your mind, Sona Kaichu? She asked, simply, hiding her own nervousness. Also, despite them being alone and not being obligated to, she showed her king the proper respect. During school hours. Sona's thoughtful frown became more prominent as she, still, stared at the door. Did you notice something odd? About Haidu-kun, Tsubaki? She asked seriously. Tsubaki's nervousness turned to confusion at that as she blinked. I don't know what you mean, Sona Kaichu. She said honestly. Sona turned her head to face her friend and queen with a serious expression. Both yesterday and today. Haidu-kun didn't make a sound whatsoever. Aside from the knocking on the door and his voice, he never made a sound. Not even when he opened and closed his bag. She explained. Tsubaki widened her eyes in what seemed to be understanding and recognition before her expression turned thoughtful. Do you think it's his sacred gear? She asked curiously. Unlikely. Sona said confidently with a shake of her head. Throughout the years, there hasn't been a sacred gear. But that kind of ability. At least, that was publicly known. With that being the case, Haidu-kun must have trained himself to be stealthy. Either subconsciously or for a reason. She explained analytically. Tsubaki thought hard on this before asking another question. You think that he's, somehow, connected to the supernatural? Sona returned her gaze at the door as she spoke. No. Haidu-kun is a human with a dormant sacred gear. For that, there is no doubt. At least, from what we have seen. So, in that sense, he might have a reason for being soundless. She said seriously, being confident in her words. Tsubaki didn't know where her king was going with her thoughts and got, internally, perplexed. Sona, then, allowed another small smile to come to her lips as she expressed her feelings on the matter. If anything, this makes Haidu-kun more interesting than he already was. And I'm looking forward to unwrap the mystery behind his existence, even if Riaz manages to reincarnate him into a devil under her first. Sona was completely and utterly unaware that she was heard by the person she was speaking of. Issei, for his part, was glad was no one close to him to see his furious expression as he glared where he knew Sona was at from his position under the same tree as the day before. God fucking damn it, I'm not some god fucking damned mystery for anyone to solve. And, most definitely, I'm not turning into a devil under no one. He raged in his thoughts, knowing his partners heard him. I agree. Was Drake's simple statement, which, despite the calmness it was spoken, managed to appear as angry. As his host. There is no way the Red Dragon Emperor will become a devil's puppet. He all but spat in disgust. At the mere thought. You're both idiots. Zangetsu, actually, had the gall to yawn, being, surprisingly, the calmest of the three. Let the girl fantasize all she wants to. From what we know, devils are arrogant and prideful species. Even if she doesn't show those traits openly, Sona is, still, a devil. Let her think whatever she wants. When the time comes for whatever she and that Ria's girl need Issei's, even whoever else's, help for, Issei will be able to, formally, introduce himself at the supernatural world. Until then, let her talk and we'll learn more about the devils. He explained his thoughts. Thoroughly, albeit seriously. For once, both Issei and Drake were left dumbfounded, which created an awkward silence between the three. Finally, it was Issei who spoke first, after he snorted in amusement and his facial expression looked calm and collected on the outside. Honestly, I don't believe that you were the voice of reason, Zangetsu. He, mentally, expressed his amusement. The sword spirit didn't reply, but the brunette got the feeling that the former was embarrassed. Something that furthered his amusement. As much as it pains my pride to admit it, partner is right. Well done, sword. Issei was impressed with Drake's skill to both congratulate and insult a person in the same sentence. For the record, the dragon didn't have a grudge against the sword spirit or the other way around. It was their way to communicate and banter in a friendly manner. Well, fuck off. Both of you. Was Zangetsu's eloquent reply to their unsubtle teasing. Issei shook his head in amusement one more time after he had cut off the communication link with his partners. His mind was clear and he didn't feel as furious as a few moments ago. The brunette took a look at the file he had received from the student council president. True to the latter's words the day before to her peers, she had fixed his entire schedule to not overlap his club hours with his classes. He was pretty sure that none of his classes, or even the future club members, had any devil in them. Which meant that he was stuck with the two perverts as the only boys who also hated his mere existence in his classes and girls that had no guts whatsoever to even speak to him for the entirety of the school year. That said, the payment he would receive as a shishu to the kendo club would be satisfying. 30.000 yen per month, cut in about half during the months with breaks or none at all during the summer break. It wasn't anything fantastic. But, for someone like Issei, who didn't spend money unnecessarily, it was a very good salary. Not to mention that his payment would be for community service. Otherwise, it would be, at the very least, thrice as high. No matter. After all, with that amount of money, Issei would be able to make the surprise he had in mind for his parents to become reality. And, even better, their vacation would last more than a week. As for the chores he would have to do, he wouldn't mind whatever Sona threw his way. He would keep being professional in his interaction with her and her peers, despite his interest in her, while, also, putting on the back of his mind the conversations he had heard between Sona herself and Riaz and Tsubaki. Feeling elated with his current thoughts, the brunette stood up from his spot under the tree, ready to start another day at school. This is the end of the video. If you enjoyed the story, then hit the like button and comment your favorite part, but for now see you all in the next video.